Murray, McKinney, Holub, and Jones, Foundations of Maternal-Newborn and Women's Health Nursing, 7th edition. Chapter 2, Social, Ethical, and Legal Issues. The family forms the foundation of society. It is the first social institution a person knows in which one learns values, norms, and expected behaviors. The family exists within a culture. The culture affects the values, beliefs, and traditions of the family. The individual and family are part of a society. The American society is faced with social and ethical dilemmas that affect individuals and families for whom nurses provide care. Some ethical and social issues result in the passage of laws that regulate reproductive practice. The nurse should understand the legal basis for his or her scope of practice. The family. Family structures. There are multiple family structures, including the most common nuclear or conjugal family with a husband, wife, and children. Extended family includes the nuclear family with grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins living together. One adult who is divorced, separated, or widowed living with a child or children is a single-parent family. Adolescent mothers constitute a type of family formation, whether the mother is single or coupled, what her developmental age is, and whether she is living with her parents or living alone. These mothers may have difficulty constructing their maternal identity. A blended or reconstituted family is one in which one or more parents brings into the union children from a previous relationship. Couples living without the legal bonds of marriage, with or without children, are in a cohabitative relationship. A communal family is a group of unrelated people who choose to live together, with the children the responsibility of the group. Foster or adoptive families are those who take responsibility for children who are not born to them. This may include foster or adoptive children from another country or of another cultural, ethnic, or racial group. Same-gender families include two adults of the same sex living together, some with children. Differing family patterns of functioning are defined by how members of the family relate to each other. These include authoritarian or autocratic, authoritative or democratic, permissive or laissez-faire, or uninvolved. In an authoritarian family, the parents make the decisions and enforce rules. In democratic families, choices and responsibility are balanced in an atmosphere of respect for all family members. In the permissive family, there is freedom with little accountability. Families are also either functional, healthy, or non-functional, unhealthy. Functional families exhibit characteristics which are helpful for a nurse to use to assess the way a specific family is functioning, including open communication with family members expressing their needs and concerns, flexibility in role assignments with family members working together to assist and support each other, agreement of adults on the basic principles of parenting with minimal discord, resiliency, and adaptability. Factors interfering with healthy family functioning include lack of financial resources, absence of adequate family support, birth of an infant who requires specialized care, presence of unhealthy habits such as substance abuse or lack of anger management, and the inability to make mature decisions necessary to provide care to an infant. High-risk families include those who live below the poverty level, those who live with chronic food insecurity, those headed by a single adolescent parent, and those with unanticipated stressors such as preterm, ill, or disabled newborn. Families with lifestyle problems such as alcoholism, substance abuse, and family violence are considered at high risk for problems in providing adequate care for the infant. It is the responsibility of nurses to refer these families to social service agencies for financial assistance, crisis intervention, home visits, substance abuse rehabilitation, and anger management programs. There are stages of families across the lifespan. From the beginning couple stage through the childbearing stage, the grown child stage, and the older family stage. The childbearing phase creates some of the most powerful changes in a family as the relationship between the adults changes to include the care of a helpless infant. Family dynamics change when children must learn to share their parents' attention with a new sibling. Cultural beliefs and practices influence what is considered normal or abnormal in family structure and relationships. Culture determines learned patterns of behavior passed down through the generations. Family demographics in the United States. Okay, so this paragraph is just a bunch of numbers and percentages that should have been a chart or table, so we can look at that later. All right, culture and childbearing families. Culture is the sum of beliefs and values that are learned, shared, and transmitted from generation to generation in a specific group of people. Cultural values guide the thinking, decisions, and actions of a group, particularly during pivotal life events such as childbirth and child rearing. Ethnic pertains to religious, racial, national, or cultural group characteristics such as speech patterns, social customs, and physical characteristics. Ethnicity is the condition of a group of people who share race, specific languages and dialects, religious faiths, traditions, values, and symbols. Ethnocentrism is when a person thinks their cultural beliefs and practices are superior to those of others and forms the basis for interpersonal conflicts. Transcultural nursing is concerned with the provision of nursing care with sensitivity for and respect of the needs of individuals, families, and groups of people. Cultural considerations. Cultural values. Leininger, 1978, identified dominant Western cultural values that may influence the thinking and action of nurses in the United States, but may not be shared by culturally diverse childbearing women and their families, including the following. Democracy is a cultural value that may not be shared by families who think decisions should be made by the family, religious figures, or higher authorities in their cultural group. Fatalism, or the belief that events and results are predestined, also may affect healthcare decisions. Individualism conflicts with the values of many cultural groups. Cleanliness is considered by some groups to be an American obsession. Preoccupation with time is a major source of conflict with those who mark time by different standards. Reliance on technology may be intimidating. The belief that optimal health is a right is in direct conflict with beliefs in many cultures in which healthcare is not a major expected right. Admiration for self-sufficiency and financial success may conflict with beliefs of other societies that place less value on wealth and more value on less tangible factors such as spirituality. Differing cultures and lack of understanding of cultures between the nurse and childbearing family may create communication difficulties related to communication style, decision-making, touch, spirituality and religiosity, and time orientation. Communication style. Styles in communication differ among cultures. For example, among Asians, nodding and smiling may mean, yes, I hear you, but may not indicate agreement or even understanding. When presenting information, the nurse should validate understanding by asking the woman to repeat the information, saying, tell me what you understand, or show me what you learned. Knowing communication principles helps nurses avoid making errors in communication. For example, Hispanics are traditionally diplomatic and tactful. They frequently engage in small talk before introducing questions about their care. Nurses should remember that small talk is a valuable use of time. It establishes rapport and helps accomplish the goals of care. It helps create an atmosphere of trust, confianza, in the relationship and helps the woman feel comfortable. Another example is American Indians/Alaska Natives often converse in a low tone that may be difficult to hear. They may consider note-taking taboo and expect the caregiver to remember what was said. Decision-making. It is important to determine who makes decisions for the family. Is it the individual woman, the husband, other family members, or traditional authority figures? If decisions are collectively made or are beyond a woman's control, such as whether prenatal care is accessed and at what time during the pregnancy, the decision makers should be included in the conversation. Eye contact. Many whites and African Americans consider eye contact important to communication. Eye contact avoidance sometimes frustrates healthcare personnel, who believe eye contact denotes honesty. In some cultures, such as American Indian and Alaska Native cultures, avoiding eye contact is a sign of respect. Eye contact behavior is also an important consideration when nurses deal with Latino infants and children. Mal ojo, evil eye, is a sudden unexplained illness when an individual with special powers admires a child too openly. Eye contact between a woman and man may be considered seductive by those from Middle Eastern cultures. Touch. Touch is also an important component of communication. In some cultures, such as those espousing Hinduism or the Islamic faith, touch by a woman other than the wife is offensive to men. Hispanics are more likely to appreciate touch, which is viewed as a sign of sincerity. Nurses should remain sensitive to the response of the person being touched and should refrain from touching if the person indicates it is not welcomed. Spirituality and religiosity. Many culturally diverse women may espouse deeply held religious and spiritual practices and beliefs and be reluctant to share those with their nurses. For example, Thai women describe the adherence to practices and rituals associated with their beliefs about three essences: the body, mind, heart, and energy. Time orientation. Time orientation can create conflict between healthcare professionals and culturally diverse childbearing women. Native Americans, Middle Easterners, and Hispanics tend to emphasize the present moment rather than the future. If a woman does not place the same importance on keeping appointments, she may encounter anger and frustration in the healthcare setting that leaves her bewildered, ashamed, and unlikely to return for care. See Nursing Care Plan, Language Barrier During Pregnancy, for an example of the issue of communication difficulties. Culture and health beliefs in childbearing. Childbirth is viewed by women as a meaningful, life-changing event, which is both pivotal and paradoxical. It is important to note that childbirth is a time of transition and social celebration in all cultures. Giving birth has the potential to be a rich and cultural, spiritual experience facilitated by a culturally competent nurse. There are more than 100 ethnocultural groups in the United States with traditional health beliefs, but it is important to recognize that culture, defined broadly, means more than ethnocultural characteristics. Culture may include childbearing women who have been sexually abused as children, or others who have definite ideas about not using birth technologies but prefer traditional means of managing labor and birth that may even include having a home birth. Culture may include poverty, low health literacy, having had female genital cutting, being disabled, or surrogate mothers. There are many cultures. Please note the following. You may not know exactly what to expect when you walk into a woman's room in the clinic or their birthing unit, but being creative, flexible, and resilient in your approach to caring will bring many satisfying cultural experiences. Take the opportunity to learn about the uniqueness of each woman you care for and about her cultural beliefs and practices surrounding childbirth. For example, Asian women may believe health is the balance between yin and yang. Those of African or Haitian origin may define health as harmony with nature. Hispanics often consider health as a balance between hot and cold. Traditional methods to prevent illness are related to cultural beliefs such as the evil eye, which causes injury, illness, or misfortune. Others are phenomena such as soul loss because of jealousy environmental factors such as bad air, and natural events such as solar eclipses. Practices to prevent illness developed from beliefs regarding the cause of illness. This includes protective or religious objects such as amulets with magic powers, or consecrated religious objects such as talismans, frequently worn or carried to prevent illness. Health maintenance. The predominant culture in the United States may treat pregnancy as high risk, with frequent prenatal visits and multiple tests, hospitalization for giving birth, and significant use of technology, including epidural analgesia/anesthesia and induced labor. On the other hand, many cultures view pregnancy as a normal physiologic condition with little or no need for health care because the woman is not sick. Traditional practices may be used to maintain health during pregnancy and birth. For example, Mexican women may keep active to ensure a small newborn and easy birth, and may continue sexual intercourse to lubricate the birth canal. East Indian women maintain a balance between hot, eggs, nuts, chili, garlic, mango, and ginger, and cold foods, fresh fruit, yogurt, buttermilk. Prenatal care may not begin for Indonesian women until the second trimester, when the soul is believed to enter the unborn child. Korean women may practice qi during pregnancy, which consists of physical postures, breathing techniques, and meditation. Native American women may tie knots or make braids during pregnancy to prevent complications involving the umbilical cord. Some groups believe unclean things and strong emotions, such as anger, cause harm to the fetus and precipitate a difficult childbirth. Immigrant and refugee childbearing women may have particular challenges, including vulnerability to being marginalized, low socioeconomic status, and lack of access to social resources, including prenatal care. Strategies have been suggested that may be helpful for nurses dealing with refugee women. Somali immigrant mothers described the limitations of support they experienced because of separation from their families, which only highlighted for them the importance of cultural and religious beliefs and practices. In a research report focusing on Korean immigrant women's experiences giving birth in the United States, Seo, Kim, and Dickerson, 2014, noted that the women developed distinct birth cultural practices that combined their Korean traditional beliefs and Western childbirth practices to promote positive outcomes. In a study of Hispanic childbearing women, they yearned, anhelo, to learn and understand more, but without sacrificing their ethnic and cultural identity. La identidad. Belief in fate. Some cultures believe in fate determining outcomes. This includes adverse events over which they have no personal control. This may mean in some instances they do not take personal responsibility for what happens when they bear a child. Preventing illness. Women may think they can ensure positive outcomes by observing cultural taboos. Advanced preparation for the newborn is also avoided in some cultures. Arabic Muslim women believe preparing for the baby defies the will of Allah. Navajo families do not choose a name for the baby until after birth because they fear it will harm the infant if identified earlier. Russian women may not buy clothes or baby equipment until the fetus is born healthy. Women in many cultures eat raw garlic or onion or adhere to food taboos and prescribed combinations of foods. Strict adherence to religious codes and moral conduct is also believed to prevent illness. The nurse should ask, what do pregnant women take to protect themselves and the baby? What special foods and drinks are important? Use of complementary and other therapies. Natural substances such as herbs and plants may be used to promote wellness and treat illness. For example, Tongan mothers use Vikita, made from orange peels and mango leaves, to prevent postpartum illness, or Kita. Dermabrasion, which is the rubbing or irritation of the skin to relieve discomfort, is a common health practice in Southeast Asia. This includes coining, in which an area is covered with an ointment and the edge of a coin rubbed over the area. These methods leave marks resembling bruises or burns on the skin, often mistaken for signs of physical abuse. Women may use religious charms, holy words, prescribed acts, and traditional healers before seeking others' health advice. Hispanics may consult curanderas for illness or a partera for care during pregnancy. Some Africans and Haitians may rely on folk medicine, including witchcraft, voodoo, or magic. Modesty. Fear, modesty, and a desire to avoid examination by men may keep some women from seeking health care during pregnancy. In many cultures, such as Muslim, Hindu, Hispanic, exposure of the genitals to men is considered demeaning. In these cultures, the reputations of women depend on their demonstrated modesty. If possible, female healthcare providers should perform examinations. If this is not possible, the woman should be carefully draped with all areas of the body covered except those that need to be exposed for examination. A female nurse should remain with these women at all times. Obtaining permission from the husband may be necessary before any examination or treatment can be performed. In addition, the woman's husband, a female friend, or a male relative should be allowed to be present during examinations. Women who have experienced female genital cutting may be fearful and anxious about modesty issues, and nurses should be respectful and non-judgmental. Culturally competent care. Nursing standards emphasize the importance of providing culturally competent care. The American Nurses Association, ANA, standards for professional nurses include the statement that registered nurses demonstrate respect, equity, and empathy in actions and interactions with culturally diverse and vulnerable healthcare consumers, supported by guidelines for culturally competent care. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services released the Enhanced National Standards for Culturally and Linguistically Appropriate Services in Health and Healthcare. Standards of the Association of Women's Health Obstetric and Neonatal Nurses, AHWAN, also emphasizes the importance of culturally competent care. In a study of pregnant black women, childbearing experiences were enriched through quality interactions with their healthcare providers. Outcomes of culturally competent care include enhanced relationships between women and their providers, reduced complications, adherence to healthcare provider recommendations, improved quality of life, increased trust, and an appreciation of cultural diversity by providers. Assessing, developing, and using culturally appropriate health education for childbearing women is essential for the culturally competent nurse to improve patient outcomes. Culturally competent nursing care requires an awareness of, sensitivity to, and respect for the diversity of the women served. It involves assessment of the family's culture and cultural negotiation when necessary. Barriers to healthcare may include linguistic and sociocultural differences, socioeconomic barriers, including lack of health insurance, a lack of health knowledge, a reluctance to question the healthcare provider, and the biomedical healthcare environment. For example, in a study of delayed health care seeking, American Muslim women with higher levels of modesty and religiosity were more likely to delay seeking prenatal care. Cultural assessment. The following questions might be considered when performing a cultural assessment. Which should be used to develop plans for care that respect cultural differences and traditional health practices? What is the family's ethnic affiliation? Is childbearing viewed as a normal physiologic process, a time of vulnerability and risk, or a state of illness? What are the prescribed practices, customs, and rituals related to diet, activity, and behavior during pregnancy and childbirth? How is childbirth pain managed, and what maternal and paternal behaviors are appropriate? What maternal restrictions or precautions are considered necessary during childbearing? Are any religious expectations required to be met after birth? Who provides support during pregnancy, childbirth, and beyond? What are the prescribed practices and restriction related to care of the newborn? Who in the family hierarchy makes healthcare decisions? What are the views of life and death, including predestination and fatalism? Do you need help understanding healthcare information? How can healthcare professionals be most helpful? Cultural negotiation. Cultural negotiation involves providing information while acknowledging the woman may hold views different from those of the nurse. A woman may not follow healthcare advice because of cultural beliefs. If the woman or her family indicates information is not helpful or is harmful in their opinion, the conflict should be acknowledged openly and clarified. I sense that you are unsure about this. Tell me your concerns. After allowing the woman and her family to express their beliefs, the nurse explains why the recommendation was made and works with the family to find a compromise satisfactory to all. Cultural negotiation also involves sensitivity to specific concerns. For example, nurses should be aware of Islamic laws governing modesty when caring for Muslim women. Some Muslim women must cover their hair, body, arms to the wrist, and legs to the ankle at all times when in the presence of men. A Muslim woman may be prohibited from being alone in the presence of a man other than her husband or a male relative. Perinatal nurses should seek to create a healthcare encounter with childbearing women that respects the sociocultural and spiritual context of life and moves beyond the superficial to understand the deeper meaning of childbearing. Perinatal nurses should never lose sight of the fact that a woman's childbirth experience is not only about making a baby, but also about creating a mother who is strong and competent and who trusts her own capacities because she has been cared for by a culturally competent nurse. Social issues. Nurses caring for patients and families must overcome social issues that influence healthcare. Some issues affecting maternity care include socioeconomic status, including poverty and homelessness, disparity in healthcare, allocation of healthcare resources, and care versus cure, and intimate partner violence and human trafficking. Socioeconomic status. The socioeconomic status of the family has significant influence on childbearing practices. The term socioeconomic status refers to the resources available for the family to meet the needs for food, shelter, and health care. Socioeconomic status can be divided into the affluent, the middle class, the working poor, and the new poor. The affluent. Affluent families have resources to provide for their needs and purchase health care. They have a good income, secure shelter in a safe neighborhood, and the education and reserves to protect themselves from economic fluctuations. They can pay for health care through either private means or insurance. Affluent families think they deserve the best in health care and respect from healthcare providers. They are future-oriented and therefore value preventative care. In general, they seek early, regular antepartum care and comply with recommendations of the healthcare providers. The middle class. The middle class constitutes the largest group of families in the United States. They usually are able to rent or own homes in relatively safe neighborhoods. They have adequate food and either education or skills that assist them to obtain and keep jobs for long periods. Middle-class families rely on group insurance, obtained as a benefit of employment, to shield themselves from exorbitant healthcare costs. A major concern is loss of job that results in loss of health insurance. They are future-oriented and seek health care early in pregnancy. The working poor and unemployed. The working poor and unemployed include unskilled or unemployed workers. They work for low wages and are often the last hired and the first fired. They may live below the poverty level and have barely enough to survive. Some have difficulty meeting their basic needs for food and shelter, and some become homeless. Because of economic uncertainty, these families place more emphasis on meeting present needs and less value on preventative, future-oriented care. This often causes them to postpone prenatal care until the second or even third trimester. See nursing care plan, socioeconomic problems during pregnancy. The new poor. The new poor constitute a group of individuals and families who were previously self-sufficient but are now without resources because of circumstances such as loss of job or health care insurance. They must find their way in an unfamiliar and frightening healthcare system. The values of the new poor are those of the middle class: self-sufficiency, hard work, and pride in the ability to succeed. Seeking public assistance is very difficult for this group. These families are devastated when they encounter the lack of respect that may occur when some healthcare workers interact with families unable to pay for healthcare. Poverty. Poverty remains an underlying factor in problems such as homelessness and inadequate access to healthcare. Although poverty in the United States decreased from 2014 to 2015, it was still 13.5%, which means there were 43.1 million people living in poverty. Because of adverse living conditions, poor health care, and poor nutrition, infants born to women in low-income groups are more likely to begin life with problems such as low birth weight. Poverty often breeds poverty. In poor families, children may leave the educational system early, making them less likely to learn skills necessary to obtain good jobs. Childbearing at an early age is common and further interferes with education and the ability to work. The cycle of poverty may continue for one generation to the next as a result of hopelessness and apathy. As healthcare costs have risen, the ability to pay for employer-sponsored health insurance has become more difficult for low and middle-income workers. The working poor have jobs but receive wages barely adequate to meet their day-to-day needs, or may work just under the full-time hours required to qualify them for employer insurance and other benefits. These jobs may not offer health insurance at all, or high premiums may be the only option. The working poor have little opportunity to save for emergencies such as serious illnesses. Preliminary data for 2016 indicates 8.8%, 28.2 million, of Americans do not have health insurance. Millions of other people have limited insurance and would not be able to survive financially in the event of a serious illness. People without health insurance seek care only when absolutely necessary. Health maintenance and illness prevention may seem costly and unnecessary to them. Some women receive no health care during pregnancy until they arrive at the hospital for birth. Homelessness. A snapshot view from the National Alliance to End Homelessness 2017 reports 564,708 people were homeless on a given night in January 2015. Families make up another 206,286, 36.5% of this number, and individuals make up another 358,422, 64.4%. Homeless families are often composed of single women and their children, and domestic violence is often part of their history as they attempt to escape the violence. Homeless people may wait until health problems are severe because of shame at becoming homeless and inability to pay for the care needed. Care is delayed until the homeless person enters the emergency room, and the needed care is far more costly than the preventative care the homeless person could not afford. A pregnant homeless woman is less likely to seek prenatal care that might identify complications such as maternal hypertension, diabetes, substance abuse, or inadequate maternal weight gain, which adds to the risk for prematurity and low birth weight. Pregnancy interferes with one's ability to work and may reduce income to the point that housing is unattainable. Disparity in healthcare. Health disparities exist in a population when different groups of people have differences in health outcomes and their causes. Circumstances such as education, income, and employment status, transportation, housing, public safety, available social support, access to and use of healthcare and preventative services, and behavioral risk factors affect health outcomes. Disparities exist across multiple lines including racial, ethnic, age, gender, socioeconomic status, and geographic, rural, inner city, urban/suburban, as well as between states. Between 1990 and 2013, maternal mortality rates significantly decreased in most countries. However, in the United States, they more than doubled. Racial variation is significant. From 2011 to 2013, the rate of maternal deaths among black women was more than 3 times greater than among white women, and more than double all other races. The infant mortality rate gap between black and white more than doubled from 2005 to 2013. Variation in the rates of sexually transmitted diseases across race and ethnic groups may be influenced by issues such as access to sexual health services and the ability to pay for them. Black women are more likely to die of cancer than white women, even though they have a lower incidence. Prenatal care is widely accepted as an important element in a good pregnancy outcome. Late or no prenatal care is associated with increased risk for maternal and infant morbidity and mortality. Utilization of prenatal care varies by race and age. In 2014, late or no prenatal care was most common among American Indian and Alaska Native women, 11% of births, Black, 10%, and Hispanic women, 8%, were also more likely to receive late or no prenatal care compared with Asian or Pacific Islander women, 6%, and white women, 4%. Teenage women are the most likely to receive late or no prenatal care. The younger the mother, the less likely the mother will receive prenatal care. 25% under age 15 and 10% ages 15 to 19. This is in stark contrast to pregnant women in their 30s who received late or no prenatal care in 4.5% of births. Factors limiting access to care should be addressed to increase the use of preconception and prenatal care. Box 2.1 summarizes some of these factors interfering with access to care. Many factors overlap. Box 2.1, poverty, unemployment, lack of medical insurance, adolescence, minority group, inner city residents, rural residents, unmarried mother status, less than high school education, inability to speak English. Barriers to prenatal care. Women's access to prenatal care is limited by financial, systemic, and attitudinal barriers. Financial barriers are among the most important factors limiting prenatal care. Many women have no insurance or insufficient insurance to cover maternity care. Although Medicaid finances prenatal care for indigent women, the enrollment process is burdensome and lengthy. Some women do not know how to access this resource or do not qualify. Systemic barriers include institutional practices that interfere with consistent care. For example, women must often wait weeks for their first visit. Prenatal visits are usually scheduled during daytime hours that conflict with working women's schedules. Taking off from work often means loss of wages and may put the woman's job in jeopardy. In addition, child care is rarely available at sites of care, and some women are unable to find affordable care. Lack of transportation may keep women from getting prenatal care. In addition, interpreters may not be available for women who do not speak English well. An important barrier to health care results from the unsympathetic attitude of some healthcare workers toward those who are unable to pay for prenatal care. Poor families may experience long delays, hurried examinations, rudeness, and arrogance from some members of the healthcare team. Staff may be overworked and frustrated with the workloads they carry. Women may wait hours for an examination that lasts only a few minutes. Many never see the same healthcare provider more than once. These women may not keep clinic appointments because they do not see the importance of the hurried examinations. Nurses should treat each family with respect and consideration. Nurses can work to determine which barriers apply to the patient with whom they work and find ways to meet the needs of the specific population being served. Scheduling prenatal visits in the evening or on weekends, setting aside times for walk-in prenatal visits, and offering other services such as applications for Medicaid and Women, Infants, and Children (WIC) programs may increase use of prenatal services. Decreasing waiting time before appointments as much as possible is important. Cultural sensitivity is important for all caregivers. Some women do not obtain early prenatal care because they do not realize they are pregnant, do not want the pregnancy confirmed, do not want anyone to know about the pregnancy, or are considering an abortion. A woman with an unintended pregnancy may be too depressed to begin prenatal care early. Many women rely on advice from family and friends during pregnancy, and some believe prenatal care is unimportant, especially when they are healthy and have no obvious problems with the pregnancy. Allocation of healthcare resources. In addition to the social factors involved in health disparities, how the available healthcare money is spent is an issue to be addressed. In 2014, the United States spent $3 trillion on healthcare, an average of $9,523 per person annually. Expenditures for healthcare continue to rise. Areas to be addressed include ways to provide care for indigent persons, the uninsured or underinsured, and those with long-term care needs. Distribution of the limited funds available for healthcare among all these areas is a major concern. Care versus cure. Another issue is whether the focus of healthcare should be on preventative and caring measures or cures for diseases. In the past, medicine has centered more on treatment and cure rather than on prevention and care. Yet prevention avoids suffering and is less expensive than treating diseases after diagnosis. The focus on cure has resulted in technologic advances enabling some people to live longer, healthier lives. However, the cost of technology should be balanced against the benefits obtained and by the number of people who benefit. Although LBW infants constitute a small percentage of all newborns, they require a large percentage of total hospital expenditures. The expenses of one preterm infant for a single day in the ICU are more than enough to pay for care of the mother throughout her pregnancy and birth. Yet if the mother had received prenatal care early and regularly, the infant might have avoided intensive care. Quality of life issues are important with regard to technology. Neonatal nurseries are able to keep very low birth weight babies alive because of advances in high technology for this group. Some of these infants go on to lead normal or near normal lives. Others gain time but not quality of life. Families and healthcare professionals face difficult decisions about when to treat, when to end treatment, and how to recognize when the suffering outweighs the benefits. Solutions. An expert committee of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine reported on measures to address the inequities. Their report, Communities in Action, Pathways to Health Equity, stressed the importance of community solutions to address local issues influencing health. Their recommendations include the need for government agencies that make decisions regarding factors affecting the health of high-risk populations, land use, housing, transportation, etc. Consider intended and unintended effects of all policies. They stress that partnerships among residents, businesses, and policymakers are required to address this issue. Government programs for healthcare. Government programs for healthcare are intended as a safety net for vulnerable populations, such as women and children with low socioeconomic status. Medicare, Medicaid, and Children's Health Insurance Program. Medicare provides health insurance for people over 65 years of age, with disabilities, or with end-stage renal disease. Medicare is federally funded and administered by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, a division of the DHHS. Medicaid provides health care for indigent persons, older adults, and persons with disabilities. Pregnant women and young children are especially targeted. Medicaid is funded by both the federal and individual state governments. The state administer the program and determine which services are offered. Although the qualifying level of poverty varies across states, all women with an income less than 133% of the current federal poverty level are eligible for perinatal care. The Children's Health Insurance Program provides health care for children up to age 19 years through Medicaid and other programs. Like Medicaid, it is funded by both the federal and state governments and administered by the state. Public clinics. Women who do not have private insurance or Medicaid may receive prenatal care at public clinics, which typically base their fees on the family's income. However, barriers to care such as limited staff, hours of operation, lack of transportation, and lack of child care for other children may affect the feasibility of such care. Temporary assistance to needy families. Temporary assistance to needy families, TANF, provides financial assistance for basic living costs for pregnant women and families with one or more dependent children. Eligibility requirements, income limits, allowance for homelessness, and the time limitations vary across states. Shelters and health care for the homeless. Federal funding has assisted homeless people with shelter and health care. However, the homeless have additional difficulties in obtaining health care because of lack of transportation, inconvenient hours, and poor continuity of care. Quality and quantity of care in clinics may be poor because of inadequate funding. Nurses have been instrumental in opening shelters, clinics, and outreach services for the homeless, with nurse practitioners often playing a major role. Clinics headed by nurse practitioners are often opened in underserved, rural, and inner-city areas. Nurses also help inform the public and legislatures about the needs of the homeless and others with few healthcare options. Innovative programs. Innovative programs to ensure all women receive good prenatal care are necessary to improve pregnancy outcomes. Some outreach programs are designed to improve health in women who traditionally do not seek prenatal care. Bilingual healthcare workers and bilingual educational classes are part of some programs. Programs may be located in schools, shopping centers, churches, workplaces, and neighborhoods that are easily accessible to people. Mobile vans, outfitted with basic equipment, bring prenatal care to women who are unable or unwilling to attend care at fixed locations or in more distant neighborhoods. The number of such neighborhood programs is insufficient to make adequate health care for women and children a reality. Intimate partner violence, IPV, is defined as abuse by a current or former partner or spouse. It includes physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, e.g. threatening a partner's loved ones or possessions or harming a partner's self-worth. Approximately 31.5% of women in the United States have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner. 8.8% have been raped by their partner, and 15.8% have experienced other forms of sexual violence by their partner. Adolescents as well as older women are victims of IPV. Although some studies show an increased incidence in economically disadvantaged groups, IPV is seen at all socioeconomic levels. Physical abuse may involve threats, slapping, and pushing. It may escalate to punching, kicking, and beating, resulting in internal injury, wounds from weapons, or death. Sexual abuse, including rape, often is part of physical abuse, with many abused women reporting being forced into sex by their male partner. Physical violence occurs within the context of continuous mental abuse, threats, coercion, and the abuser blames the victim for causing the abuse. As a result, victims feel shame, loss of self-respect, and powerlessness. They are often isolated from friends and family. Abused women often report reproductive coercion, attempts by the abuser to interfere with contraception use, and pregnancy. Although IPV spans all demographic categories, some factors associated with an increased risk include low self-esteem, low income, heavy alcohol and drug use, depression, and history of abuse. Effects of IPV during pregnancy. Violence may start or escalate in frequency and severity during pregnancy and the postpartum period. Pregnancy adds more stress to the relationship. The partner may feel trapped in the relationship and under increased pressure to provide emotional and financial support for the woman and infant. Up to 20% of women may be physically abused during pregnancy. Abuse occurs more often during pregnancy than any other commonly screened medical complication, with the possible exception of preeclampsia. The risk for abuse continues into the postpartum period. Abuse during pregnancy is correlated with health problems for the mother and the infant. Abused women are more likely than non-abused women to start prenatal care late. They have an increased risk for uterine rupture, placental abruption, preterm birth, LBW infants, and maternal and fetal death. They may have increased risk for STDs and peripartum depression. Physical abuse of the mother may be an indication of what life holds for the unborn child. Some men who batter women also batter children, and some women who are victims of violence abuse their children. Approximately 27% of abused women abuse their children. Child abuse occurs in 33 to 77% of homes where there is IPV. Children who witness violence in the home may have psychological, social, emotional, and behavioral problems. Adults who abuse others often were abused as children. Factors that promote violence. Family violence occurs in families in which roles are gender-based and little value is placed on the woman's role. Men hold the power, and women are viewed as less worthy of respect than are men. Women usually earn less than men do in the job market, and they are often victimized by marriage. They may remain in unhealthy relationships because they are financially dependent on their partners. If they divorce, women often become single parents with a standard of living lower than that of their former husbands. The woman's role in her own culture is important. For example, in many cultures, women think that they should be submissive to men and sacrifice for their families because it is their duty to keep the family together. They may not have the education to be able to access help or obtain a job to provide a means of support if they should leave their partners. If the woman is an illegal immigrant, she is less likely to seek help from authorities for fear of being deported. Stereotyping males as powerful and females as weak and without value has a profound effect on the self-esteem of women. Many women internalize these messages and come to believe they are less worthy than their partners, and they are the cause of their own punishment. The woman may come to accept her partner's statements indicating she is the cause of the violence. She may minimize the abuse or indicate to others that it is unusual. Women often feel a need to help the abuser and hope the partner will change and the abuse will end. As the relationship becomes increasingly abusive, the woman may begin to look for help. Although alcohol is often stated as a cause of violence against women, chemical dependence and IPV are two separate problems. Chemical dependence is a disease of addiction, but abuse is a learned behavior and can be unlearned. However, violence may become more severe or bizarre when alcohol or drugs are involved. See Table 2.2 for a summary of the myths and the realities of violence against women. Characteristics of the abuser. Physical abuse is about power, and it is only one of many tactics abusive men use to control their partners. Other tactics include isolation, intimidation, and threats. Extreme jealousy and possessiveness are typical of the abuser. An abusive man often attempts to control every aspect of a woman's life, such as where she goes, to whom she speaks, and what she wears. He controls access to money and transportation and may force a woman to account for every moment spent away from him. The abusive man often has a low tolerance for frustration and poor impulse control. He does not perceive his violent behavior as a problem and often denies responsibility for the violence by blaming the woman. Most abusive men come from homes in which they witnessed the abuse of their mothers or were themselves abused as children. Cycle of violence. Although IPV may be random, there is often a pattern. Violence occurs as a cycle consisting of 3 phases: tension building phase, a battering incident, and the honeymoon or calm phase. Being aware of the behaviors associated with each phase will enable a nurse to counsel the woman. Figure 2.2. Nurses' role in prevention of abuse. Nurses can do a great deal to prevent physical abuse of women. First, they should examine their own beliefs to determine whether they accept the attitude that blames the victim. Why was she wearing that? She shouldn't have flirted with someone else. Why did she stay with him? Second, nurses can consciously practice empowerment of women. They should make it clear that the woman owns her body and has the right to decide how it should be treated. Nurses should use language indicating the woman is an active partner in her care. You understand your body. What do you think? During examinations, nurses can introduce aspects of care to increase the woman's control over the situation. For example, make sure when the woman first meets the physician or nurse practitioner who is to examine her, she is seated and clothed instead of being unclothed and in a lithotomy position. School nurses are in an excellent position to influence how teenagers define gender roles. Real men don't beat up women. Girls don't have to put up with verbal or physical abuse from anyone. Use a condom. It's not cool to give STDs or an unwanted pregnancy to someone you care about. Nurses should be familiar with national resources designed to provide healthcare workers with technical assistance, training materials, posters, bibliographies, and relevant articles. The National Domestic Violence Hotline offers information on crisis assistance throughout the United States. They have interpreters for 170 different languages and are available 24 hours a day. The other sources listed here provide information but are not crisis lines. National Domestic Violence Hotline, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Women who are being abused should be warned not to use their home computers to access the internet for sources of information about abuse because their partners may be able to find out how recently used internet sites. Human trafficking. Human trafficking is the recruitment and movement of individuals domestically and or internationally for the purpose of exploitation. Trafficking in persons, TIP, takes many forms. However, the most common is sexual exploitation in sex trafficking and labor trafficking, which traffickers accomplish by means of force, coercion, and or deception. Although it is commonly recognized that there is no sound methodology for accurately generating the U.S. and global incidence of TIP, the International Labor Organization, ILO, estimates approximately 2.5 million persons are trafficked annually. The number is staggering considering estimates of only 1 in 100 victimizations are actually reported. The lack of scholarly evidence, accurate estimations of victimization, and best practices is commonly attributed in part to a lack of identification and reporting by healthcare providers. Duchesne, 2013, recognized sex trafficking as a global pandemic. Women and children of childbearing age make up the majority of reported TIP cases, with the average age of entry into sex trafficking reported to be between 12 to 14 years of age. Victims of TIP are subjected to an extensive myriad of abuses, including but not limited to sexual abuse, physical abuse, torture, psychological abuse, and the denial of basic human needs such as food and shelter. Further complicating the provision of care to this population is the isolation from support networks such as friends, family, and spiritual services. Considering the abuses sustained by victims while under control of the trafficker and the inherently shallow nature of human trafficking, it is important to recognize that victims of TIP typically do not receive routine health care, much less prenatal care and education. Subsequently, mental and physical health outcomes seen in this population include but are not limited to increased incidence of HIV, pelvic inflammatory disease, botched home abortions, retained products of conception, damage to reproductive organs, precipitous deliveries, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and self-harm attempts. Although the scope and magnitude of providing informed care to this population is beyond the scope of this chapter, it is important for nurses caring for women of childbearing age to be aware and assess their patients for the red flags of TIP exploitation. Recognizing victims of TIP rarely self-identify. A list of possible red flags found in victims of human trafficking is provided in box 2.2. Although one red flag may not be indicative of the patient being a victim of TIP, the nurse should be assessing for patterns of red flags. Box 2.2, Human Trafficking Red Flags. A person who is accompanied by an individual who insists on answering your questions, reluctance or inability of the victim to reveal the true situation, signs and symptoms of physical and mental abuse, evidence of being controlled, fearful, submissive, fear of authority figures, lack of identification documents, cannot relate their physical address, inconsistent stories and or histories, foreign/non-English speaking, homeless, previous and or current prostitution charges, history of sexual abuse, possession of expensive electronics, jewelry, and other luxury items, history of substance abuse, markings on the body that appear to be branding, high number of sex partners relative to age. For instance, a patient who is not English speaking would not necessarily raise suspicion, but a non-English speaking minor patient who does not know his or her address and is accompanied by an older person who will not let the patient speak may raise the nurse's index of suspicion. Maternal-newborn nurses are in a unique position to recognize victimized patients and begin the critical chain of recognition and intervention for this most vulnerable population. Application of the nursing process. The battered woman. Assessment. During pregnancy, a woman is likely to have more frequent contact with healthcare providers than at any other time in her life. Because of the prevalence of IPV during pregnancy, women should be asked about IPV at each prenatal visit, on admission to the hospital, and again at the postpartum checkup. After pregnancy, visits to the pediatrician usually occur frequently during the infant's first year and provide other opportunities for screening. Unfortunately, few women identify themselves as victims of IPV, and many remain unrecognized. When they are first approached, women may deny abuse has occurred. They may feel judged and stigmatized because they do not want to leave the relationship and fear their children will be taken away if they reveal the situation. The woman who is not ready to seek help when she is first asked may be ready at a later time. Asking in a non-judgmental way, and especially asking more than once, may lead the woman to seek help at a later time. Written information about abuse should be placed in places such as restrooms, where it will not be seen by the partner. This implies discussion of violence is encouraged and safe. Many nurses are unsure about how to approach the issue of suspected abuse. Women often seek care during the honeymoon phase of the violence cycle. During this phase, the man is often overly solicitous, hovering husband syndrome, and eager to explain any injuries the woman exhibits. He often answers questions directed at the woman. Critical Thinking Exercise 2.1. Mandy, a 28-year-old prima gravida, is admitted to the Labor, Delivery, and Recovery Unit with contractions at 34 weeks of gestation. The right side of her face is swollen. Old bruises, shaped like fingerprints, are present on her upper arms, and a large bruised area is apparent on her abdomen. She is accompanied by her husband, who is very solicitous. He verbalizes concern about her labor status and remains close beside her at all times. Mandy appears lethargic and avoids eye contact with the nurse who is admitting her. She states that she fainted at home and hurt herself when she fell against the bathtub. The nurse accepts the explanation and asks no further questions. Questions. What assumptions has the nurse made? What should make the nurse question whether the injuries resulted from falling? At the change of shifts, Mandy is assigned to another nurse. The nurse waits for a time when Mandy's husband is out of the room and she can be alone with Mandy. The nurse asks, "Did you get these injuries from being hit?" Mandy appears extremely anxious and says, "Don't say anything to him. He got so mad when I was late getting home from shopping. It was my fault." Questions. Why did the nurse wait for time alone with Mandy before asking questions? How should the nurse respond? What bias should the nurse resist? How could Mandy be protected? Introducing the subject of violence in the presence of the man who may be responsible for it places the woman in danger. It is absolutely essential to separate the woman from the man for the discussion of violence. No other family members should be present during the interview. Even children may reveal the discussion of abuse to the partner or family members. A common concern about discussing IPV is having time with the woman without her partner. Sometimes the partner can be sent to another area to give insurance information. Telling the partner that the nurse plans to discuss feminine hygiene and needs privacy also may be a way to have time alone with the woman. Other reasons nurses cite for not discussing IPV include lack of time, not knowing what to do if IPV is discovered, and language barriers. If language barriers are present, a professional interpreter should be used to translate and never a family member or friend. When a private, secure place has been found, explain that many women experience abuse. For example, because abuse is very common and can affect a woman's health, it is the policy at this hospital to ask every woman about abuse situations. This lets the woman know she is not being singled out for questioning. Reassure her privacy will be protected and confidentiality will be maintained. Common screening questions include the following. Have you been threatened, hit, slapped, kicked, choked, or otherwise physically hurt by anyone within the last year? Has this happened since you have been pregnant? Has anyone forced you to have sexual activities? Are you afraid of anyone? A yes answer should prompt questions about who hurt the woman and the frequency and kinds of abuse. If a woman has old or new signs of possible abuse, ask questions such as, did someone hurt you? And, did you receive these injuries from being hit? The abused woman often appears hesitant, embarrassed, or evasive. She may speak in a low tone of voice, be unable to look the nurse in the eye, and appear guilty, ashamed, jumpy, or frightened. She may have a flat affect, absence of facial response, or one inappropriate for the situation. Evaluate and document all signs of injury, both past and present. This includes areas of welts, bruising, swelling, lacerations, burns, and scars. Injuries are most commonly noted on the face, breasts, abdomen, and genitalia. Many women have new or old fractures of the face, nose, ribs, or arms. A photograph or a drawing may be used to record areas of injury. These may be important for future legal action. If sexual abuse has occurred, a gynecologic examination is necessary because trauma to the labia, vagina, cervix, or anus often is present. Types of forced sex may include vaginal intercourse, anal intercourse, and insertion of objects into the vagina and anus. Be particularly alert for nonverbal cues indicating abuse has occurred. Facial grimacing or a slow, unsteady gait may indicate pain. Vomiting or abdominal tenderness may indicate internal injury. A flat affect is indicative of women who mentally withdraw from the situation to protect themselves from the horror and humiliation they experience. Keep in mind the woman may fear for her life because abusive episodes tend to escalate. Open-ended questions help prompt full disclosure and the expression of feelings. Record direct quotes of what the woman says about her experience. Identification of patient problems. A variety of patient problems may be applicable, depending on assessment data. The most meaningful may be fearfulness secondary to the potential for injury to self or children. Planning, expected outcomes. The abused woman may have difficulty developing a long-term plan of care without a great deal of specialized assistance. She often is unwilling to leave the abusive situation, and nurses should focus on working with the woman to make short-term plans to protect her from future injury. The expected outcomes are that the woman will, 1. Acknowledge the physical assaults, 2. Develop a specific plan of action for when the abusive cycle begins, 3. Identify community resources that can provide protection for her and her children. Interventions. Listening. Use therapeutic communication techniques to listen and encourage the woman to share her feelings. Assure her you understand her situation is a difficult one and she has been surviving as well as she can. Praise even small positive steps she has taken to ensure safety for herself and her children. The woman should make her own decisions about whether to continue the relationship and should not feel coerced to end it. Developing a personal safety plan. Ask the woman what she does to decrease or avoid violence from her partner. Help her make concrete plans to protect her safety and that of her children. For example, if the woman insists on returning to the shared home, describes a cycle of behavior that culminates in physical abuse and factors such as drug or alcohol use that precipitate a violent episode. Discuss behaviors indicating the level of frustration and anger is increasing to the point at which the danger is escalating. Assist her to do the following. Locate the nearest shelter, safe house, or another safe place and make specific plans to go there once the cycle of violence begins. Identify the safest, quickest routes out of the home. Hide extra keys to the car and house, money, personal information, social security numbers, birth certificates, insurance policy information, driver's license, bank account numbers, passport, medications, some clothes for herself and her children, and personal necessities. She should not hide them in the house, but find another place such as the house of a friend or relative. Devise a code word and prearrange with someone to call the police when the word is used. Memorize the telephone number of the shelter or hotline because time is often a crucial element in the decision to leave. An easy number to remember is the one for the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-SAFE, which provides immediate crisis assistance in the caller's community. Review the safety plan frequently because leaving the partner is one of the most dangerous times. Women are more likely to be injured or killed when they are leaving than at any other time. Affirming she is not to blame. The abused woman often believes she is responsible for the abuse. Let her know no one deserves to be hurt for any reason. The one who hurt her is the person responsible. She did not provoke it or cause it and could not have prevented it. Nurses are often responsible for teaching basic family processes such as the following. Violence is not normal. Violence usually is repeated and escalates. Battering is against the law. Abused women have alternatives. She also needs non-judgmental acceptance and recognition of the difficulties involved in making changes in her situation. Praise her for any action she takes, even if they are only minor steps towards making her life safer. Reassure her that she is doing the right thing for herself and her children when she seeks help and makes plans for escape. Providing education. The pregnant woman is likely to worry about the effect of abuse on her pregnancy. Discuss the increased incidence of preterm labor with her and explain the signs. If she is using substances, explain the effects of smoking and of the use of alcohol and drugs and help her make plans to decrease or stop her use. Help her identify stressors and explore ways to reduce them wherever possible. Providing referrals. When contact with the battered woman is a short-term one, many interventions are outside the scope of nursing practice. Refer the family to community agencies such as the police department, legal services, community shelters, counseling services, and social service agencies as needed. Include mental health referrals if necessary, for treatment of depression or for counseling. Document referrals were made and whether the woman accepted them. It is essential to accept the decisions of the battered woman and acknowledge she is on her own timetable. She may not take any actions at the time they are recommended. Therefore, listening to her, believing her, and providing information about resources may be the only help the nurse can provide until the woman is ready to do more. Do not become negative or pass judgment on the partner of an abused woman. She is often tied to the man by both economic and emotional bonds and may become defensive if her partner is criticized. Tell her resources are available for her partner, but he must first admit abuse and seek assistance before help can be offered. Initiating referrals for the partner before he asks for help will increase the danger to the woman if he thinks he has been betrayed. Evaluation. The plan of care can be deemed successful if the woman acknowledges the violent episodes in the home, makes concrete plans to protect herself and her children from future injury, and makes plans to use the community resources available to her.